Good afternoon. Once again, I'm a little challenged by the new streaming software on YouTube, but I'll do my best. And I trust that my sound is good, and I'm hoping that my sound is good. Please confirm that. And so I'm going to begin a little early from what I scheduled because it's Friday evening and I had to wait until the people that are putting new siding on my building got finished, but here I am. So yesterday we got a pretty good set of comments, and I look forward to your comments today. One thing I want to emphasize is that unlike Nietzsche, who declared that God is dead, Dr. Carl Jung found the living God, found where he lives, and how he goes about doing the work of the Godhead. And if you follow this channel, you won't have to say you believe, you will know. So, with that said, I'm going to continue. So today I'm reading the second part of essay in The Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious by C.G. Jung. This is volume 9-1 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. And I'm beginning with paragraph 29. Yesterday I read the first part. There will be two parts subsequently. So to begin, paragraph 29. Just as in Christianity, the vow of worldly poverty turned the mind away from the riches of this earth, so spiritual poverty seeks to renounce the false riches of the spirit in order to withdraw not only from the sorry remnants, which today call themselves the Protestant Church, of a great past, but also from all the allurements of the odorous East, in order, finally, to dwell with itself alone, where, in the cold light of consciousness, the blank barrenness of the world reaches to the very stars. That's cheery, isn't it? Paragraph 30. We have inherited this poverty from our fathers. I well remember the confirmation lessons I received at the hands of my own father. The catechism bored me unspeakably. One day I was turning over the pages of my little book in the hope of finding something interesting, when my eye fell on the paragraphs about the Trinity. This interested me at once, and I waited impatiently for the lessons to get to that section. But when the longed-for lesson arrived, my father said, quote, "We'll skip this bit. I can't make head or tail of it myself," unquote. With that, the last hope of With that, my last hope was laid in the grave. I admired my father's honesty, but this did not alter the fact that from then on, all talk of religion bored me to death. Paragraph 31. Our intellect has achieved the most tremendous things, but in the meantime, our spiritual dwelling has fallen into disrepair. We are absolutely convinced that even with the aid of the latest and largest reflecting telescope, now being built in America, men will discover behind the farthest nebulae no fiery empyrean. And we know that our eyes will wander despairingly through the dead emptiness of interstellar space. Thanks, Brent, I appreciate that. Nor is it any better when mathematical physics reveals to us the world of the infinitely small. In the end, we dig up the wisdom of all ages and peoples, only to find that everything most dear and precious to us has already been said in the most superb language. Like greedy children, we stretch out our hands and think that if only we could grasp it, we would possess it too. But what we possess is no longer valid, and our hands grow weary from the grasping for riches. And our hands grow weary from the grasping, for riches lie everywhere as far as the eye can reach. All these possessions turn to water, and more than one sorcerer's apprentice has been drowned in the waters called up by himself. If he did not first succumb to the saving delusion that this wisdom was good and that it was bad. Sorry, let me read that parenthetical again. If he did not first succumb to the saving delusion that this wisdom was good and that was bad. It is from these adepts that there come those terrifying invalids who think they have a prophetic mission. For the artificial sundering of true and false wisdom creates a tension in the psyche, and from this there arises a loneliness and a craving like that of the morphine addict, who always hopes to find companions in his vice. Paragraph 32. When our natural inheritance has been dissipated, then the spirit too, as Heraclitus says, has descended from its fiery heights. But when spirit becomes heavy, it turns to water, and with Luciferian presumption, the intellect usurps the seat where once the spirit was enthroned. The spirit may legitimately claim the patria potestas over the soul. Not so the earth-born intellect, which is man's sword or hammer, and not a creator of spiritual worlds, a father of the soul. Hence, Ludwig Klages and Max Scheler were moderate enough in their attempts to rehabilitate the spirit, but both were children of an age in which the spirit was no longer up above, but down below, no longer fire, but water. Paragraph 33. Therefore, the way of the soul in search of its lost father, like Sophia seeking Bythos, leads to the water, to the dark mirror that reposes at its bottom. Whoever has elected for the state of spiritual poverty, the true heritage of Protestantism, carried to its logical conclusion, goes the way of the soul that leads to the water. This water is no figure of speech, but a living symbol of the dark psyche. I can best illustrate this by a concrete example, one out of many. A Protestant theologian often dreamed the same dream. He stood on a mountain slope with a deep valley below, and in it a dark lake. He knew in the dream that something had always prevented him from approaching the lake. This time he resolved to go to the water. As he approached the shore, everything grew dark and uncanny, and a gust of wind suddenly rushed over the face of the water. He was seized by a panic fear and awoke. Paragraph 35. This dream shows us the natural symbolism. The dreamer descends into his own depths, and the way leads him to the mysterious water. And now there occurs the miracle of the pool of Bethesda. An angel comes down and touches the water, endowing it with healing power. In the dream it is the wind, the pneuma, which bloweth where it listeth. Man's descent to the water is needed in order to evoke the miracle of its coming to life, but the breath of the Spirit rushing over the dark water is uncanny, like everything whose cause we do not know, since it is not ourselves. It hints at an unseen presence, a noumen to which neither human expectation nor the machinations of the will have given life. It lives of itself, and a shudder runs through the man who thought that spirit was merely what he believes, what he makes himself, what is said in books, and what people talk about. But when it happens spontaneously, it is a spookish thing, and primitive fear seizes the naive man. The elders of the Elgani tribe in Kenya gave me exactly the same description of the nocturnal god, whom they called the maker of fear. He comes to you, they said, like a cold gust of wind, and you shudder, or he goes whistling round in the tall grass. An African Pan who glides among the reeds in the haunted noontide hour, playing on his pipes and frightening the shepherds. Hi, good afternoon, Brent. Nice to see you here. I'm moving on. Thus in the dream, the breath of the Numa frightened another pastor, a shepherd of the flock, who in the darkness of the night trod the reed-grown shore in the deep valley of the Psyche. Yes, that erstwhile fiery spirit has made a descent to the realm of nature, to the trees and rocks and the waters of the Psyche, like the old man in Nietzsche's Zarathustra, who, wearied of humankind, withdrew into the forest to growl with the bears in honor of the Creator. We must surely go the way of the waters, which always tend downward, if we would raise up the treasure and precious heritage of the Father. In the Gnostic hymn to the soul, and in this hymn he's referring to the hymn of the pearl, and I have separately on this channel read the hymn of the pearl as presented by Dr. Edward Edinger, so you can put that into the search element on the YouTube channel. In the Gnostic hymn of the soul, the son is sent forth by his parents to seek the pearl that fell from the king's crown. It lies at the bottom of a deep well guarded by a dragon in the land of the Egyptians, that land of fleshpots and drunkenness with all its material and spiritual riches. The son and heir sets out to fetch the jewel, but forgets himself and his task in the orgies of Egyptian worldliness, until a letter from his father reminds him what his duty is. He then sets out for the water and plunges into the dark depths of the well, where he finds the pearl on the bottom, and in the end offers it to the highest divinity. This hymn, ascribed to Bardesanes, dates from an age that resembled ours in more than one respect. Mankind looked and waited, and it was a fish, levatus de profundo, drawn from the deep, that became the symbol of the Savior, the bringer of healing. As I wrote these lines, I received a letter from Vancouver from a person unknown to me. The writer is puzzled by his dreams, which are always about water. Quote, almost every time I dream it is about water. Either I am having a bath, or the water closet is overflowing, or a pipe is bursting, or my home has drifted down to the water's edge, or I see an acquaintance about to sink into water, or I am trying to get out of water, or I am having a bath and the tub is about to overflow. Unquote. Water is the commonest symbol of the unconscious. The lake in the valley is the unconscious, which lies, as it were, underneath consciousness, so that it is often referred to as the subconscious, usually with the pejorative connotation of an inferior consciousness. Water is the valley of the spirit, the water dragon of the Tao, whose nature resembles water, a yang embraced in the yin. Psychologically, therefore, water means spirit that has become unconscious. So the dream of the theologian is quite right in telling him that down by the water he could experience the working of the living spirit by a miracle of healing in the pool of Bethesda. The descent into the depths always seems to precede the ascent. Thus another theologian dreamed that, quote, he saw on a mountain a kind of castle of the Grail. He went along a road that seemed to lead straight to the foot of the mountain and up it. But as he drew nearer, he discovered to his great disappointment that a chasm separated him from the mountain, a deep, darksome gorge with underworldly water rushing along the bottom. A steep path led downwards and toilsomely climbed up again on the other side. But the prospect looked uninviting, and the dreamer awoke. Here again the dreamer, thirsting for the shining heights, had first to descend into the dark depths, and this proves to be the indispensable condition for climbing any higher. The prudent man avoids the danger lurking in these depths, but he also throws away the good which a bold but imprudent venture might bring. The statement made by the dream meets with violent resistance from the conscious mind, which knows spirit only as something to be found in the heights. Spirit always seems to come from above, while from below comes everything that is sordid and worthless. For people who think in this way, spirit means highest freedom, a soaring above the depths, deliverance from the prison of the chthonic world, and hence a refuge of all those timorous souls who do not want to become anything different. But water is earthly and tangible. It is also the fluid of the instinct-driven body, blood and the flowing of blood, the odor of the beast, carnality heavy with passion. The unconscious is the psyche that reaches down from the daylight of mentality and morally lucid consciousness into the nervous system that for ages has been known as the sympathetic. This does not govern perception and muscular activity like the cerebrospinal system, and thus control the environment, but though functioning without sense organs, it maintains the balance of life, and through the mysterious paths of sympathetic excitation, not only gives us knowledge of the innermost life of other beings, but also has an inner effect upon them. In this sense, it is an extremely collective system, the operative basis of all participation mystique, whereas the cerebrospinal function teaches its high point in separating off the specific qualities of the ego and only apprehends surfaces and externals. Always through the medium of space, it experiences everything as an outside, whereas the sympathetic system experiences everything as an inside. The unconscious is commonly regarded as a sort of encapsulated fragment of our most personal and intimate life, something like what the Bible calls the heart and considers the source of all evil thoughts. Let me read that again to make the correct emphasis. Something like what the Bible calls the heart and considers the source of all evil thoughts. In the chambers of the heart dwell the wicked blood spirits, swift anger and sensual weakness. This is how the unconscious looks when seen from the conscious side. But consciousness appears to be essentially an affair of the cerebrum, which sees everything separately and in isolation, and therefore sees the unconscious in this way too, regarding it outright as my unconscious. Hence it is generally believed that anyone who descends into the unconscious gets into a suffocating atmosphere of of egocentric subjectivity, and in this blind alley is exposed to the attack of all the ferocious beasts which the caverns of the psychic underworld are supposed to harbor. True, whoever looks into the mirror of the water will see, first of all, his own face. Whoever goes to himself risks a confrontation with himself. The mirror does not flatter. It faithfully shows whatever looks into it, namely the face we never show to the world because we cover it with the persona, the mask of the actor. But the mirror lies behind the mask and shows the true face. Good afternoon, Info. What are we talking about today? We're talking about the unconscious. We're talking about the deep water of the unconscious. And I have 2 more pages to go. Paragraph 44, this confrontation is the first test of courage on the inner way, a test sufficient to frighten off most people, for the meeting with ourselves belongs to the more unpleasant things that can be avoided so long as we can project everything negative into the environment. But if we are able to see our own shadow and can bear knowing about it, then a small part of the problem has already been solved. We have at least brought up the personal unconscious. The shadow is a living part of the personality and therefore wants to live with it in some form. It cannot be argued out of existence and rationalized into harmlessness. Let me read that sentence once more because it's one of the 3 archetypes that Dr. Jung is talking about in this essay, namely the anima, the shadow, and the old man. So in this case, we're talking about the shadow. The shadow is a living part of the personality and therefore wants to live with it in some form. It cannot be argued out of existence or rationalized into harmlessness. This problem is exceedingly difficult because it not only challenges the whole man, but reminds him at the same time of his helplessness and ineffectuality. Strong natures, or should one rather call them weak, do not like to be reminded of this, but prefer to think of themselves as heroes who are beyond good and evil, and to cut the Gordian knot instead of untying it. Nevertheless, the account has to be settled sooner or later. In the end, one has to admit that there are problems which one simply cannot solve on one's own resources. Such an admission has the advantage of being honest, truthful, and in accord with reality, and thus prepares the ground for a compensatory reaction from the collective unconscious. You are now more inclined to give heed to a helpful idea or intuition, or to notice thoughts which had not been allowed to voice themselves before. I'll read that parenthetical once more. You are now more inclined to give heed to a helpful idea or intuition, or to notice thoughts which had not been allowed to voice themselves before. Perhaps you will pay attention to the dreams that visit you at such moments, or will reflect on certain inner and outer occurrences that take place just at this time. If you have an attitude of this kind, then the helpful power slumbering in the deepest strata of man's nature can come awake and intervene, for helplessness and weakness are the eternal experience and the eternal problem of mankind. To this problem there is also an eternal answer, otherwise it would have been all up with humanity long ago. When you have done everything that could possibly be done, the only thing that remains is what you could still do if only you knew it. But how much do we know of ourselves? Precious little, to judge by experience. Hence, there is still a great deal of room left for the unconscious. Prayer, as we know, calls for a very similar attitude and therefore has much of the same effect. The necessary and needful reaction from the collective unconscious expresses itself in archetypally formed ideas. The meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow. The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared, who goes down to the deep well. But one must learn to know oneself in order to know who one is. For what comes after the door is, surprisingly enough, a boundless expanse, full of unprecedented uncertainty, with apparently no inside and no outside, no above and no below, no here and no there, no mine and no thine, no good and no bad. It is the world of water where all life floats in suspension. I'm going to have to hold off for just a minute. Okay, I apologize. Going back. So we were talking about breaking through here and how the shadow is the tight passage. So let me read that once again, and how the collective unconscious comes to help us. The necessary and needful reaction, and let me just interrupt for a moment. I did the reading on, or I did the video on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez the other day, and I pointed out that she is being pushed up by the collective, by both her friends and her enemies. And so you can think of this next paragraph as her enemies are projecting their shadow on her. Her friends are seeing her as part of their conscious self. And so, paragraph 45, the necessary and needful reaction from the collective unconscious expresses itself in archetypally formed ideas. The meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow. The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared, who goes down to the deep well. But one must learn to know oneself in order to know who one is. For what comes after the door is, surprisingly enough, a boundless expanse full of unprecedented uncertainty, with apparently no inside and no outside, no above and no below, no here and no there, no mine and no thine, no good and no bad. It is the world of water where all life floats in suspension, where the realm of the sympathetic system, the soul of everything living, begins, where I am indivisibly this and that, where I experience the other in myself and the other than myself experiences me. Paragraph 46. No, the collective unconscious is anything but an encapsulated personal system. It is sheer objectivity, as wide as the world and open to all the world. There I am the object of everything subject, in complete reversal of my ordinary consciousness, where I am always the subject that has an object. There I am utterly one with the world, so much a part of it that I forget all too easily who I really am. Lost in oneself is a good way of describing this state, but this self is the world, if only a consciousness could see it. That is why we must know who we are. The unconscious no sooner touches us than we are it. We become unconscious of ourselves. That is the age-old danger, instinctively known and feared by primitive man, who himself stands so very close to this pleroma. His consciousness is still uncertain, wobbling on its feet. It is still childish, having just emerged from the primal waters. A wave of the unconscious may easily roll over it, and then he forgets who he was and does things that are strange to him. Hence, primitives are afraid of uncontrolled emotions, because consciousness breaks down under them and gives way to possession. All man's strivings have therefore been directed toward the consolidation of consciousness. This was the purpose of rite and dogma. They were dams and walls to keep back the dangers of the unconscious, the perils of the soul. Primitive rites consist accordingly in the exorcising of spirits, the lifting of spells, the averting of the evil omen, propitiation, purification, and the production by sympathetic magic of helpful occurrences. Paragraph 48. It is these barriers erected in primitive times that later became the foundations of the church. It is also these barriers that collapse when the symbols become weak with age. Then the waters rise and boundless catastrophes break over mankind. The religious leader of the Taos Pueblo, known as Locotenent Gobernador, once said to me, "The Americans should stop meddling with our religion, for when it dies and we can no longer help the sun, our father, to cross the sky, the Americans and the whole world will learn something in 10 years' time, for then the sun won't rise anymore." For then the sun won't rise anymore. In other words, light will fall, the light of consciousness is extinguished, and the dark sea of the unconscious breaks in. Okay. So I'm going to discontinue at that point. That's the second of my 4 readings from the essay entitled Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, and I'll come back to the reading tomorrow if possible. Unfortunately, I have people putting new siding on my building today, so I had to be late. And so let me look at your comments. Info Overdose says, is Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious the same book as Psychology of the Unconscious? Because I heard that Psychology of the Unconscious was revised. The answer to that question is no. Psychology of the Unconscious was the book that was revised into Symbols of Transformation, and it is now, I believe it's volume 6 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. This is Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, which is volume 9-1 of the collected works. Brent says, Muller's report is done. It could be a deep dive into our collective unconscious, the shadow. Well, if you're reporting news, I guess that's good news. At least we can stop our anxiety attacks over it. We've already been having the deep dive into our collective unconscious and the shadow for the last 2.5 years, I think. And so we can only, once the Mueller report comes out and its consequences start to become known, maybe we can start to swim our way out of the shadow. Okay, so I'm sorry that I have to discontinue today, but I have a commitment with my wife, so I'm going to stop this stream right now, but I will resume the reading in this essay, which is the first essay in this book, tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow. And so I'll be back. And Info Overdose says, what is the Mueller report? Aha, you can't be American and ask that question. Robert Mueller is the special prosecutor who has been looking into the connection between our president, his campaign, and the Russians, and whether our president is a tool of the Russian government. And so we'll all have to make our own judgment going forward based on that. Brent says it's news on CNN now, so it must be true. I guess I'll have to stop and take a look. So stopping the stream now. I'm sorry, but it's Friday evening and I have other things I have to do. Peace. Thank you for being